Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm Krashy, and today we're going to dive into a little discussion talking about team composition. Now, I do think that this is pretty important, and one thing that I've noticed is that I'll run into games on ladder or just like playing the game where your team doesn't really even try to put a team comp together, and then you kind of just lose the game at the draft screen. And so I want to talk about like what is important to have in a team composition, and we're just going to use my tier list maker to kind of illustrate what it looks like when teams are drafting, to kind of talk about, well, what should I be picking here? I probably could have made a better presentation for this, but that aside, we're just going to go into it. So we have team 1 and team 2, and we have all the heroes here lined up, and we still have like a snake draft. There's no banning, and it's all blind pick, so you can still mirror, but you still can see what the other team is picking, and you can see what your team is picking and try to make a conscious decision. So let's hypothetically just put together a team, right? I really should have done like a snake draft, but it's so random every single time because you never know where the person's going to be, what role is going to be where, so it can get a little bit different each time. But let's say your draft starts off and your off laner picks Shinbi, right? Like that's your off lane. And then the enemy team, you don't know what they're picking, but they have like Steel and Gideon, sure. And actually I can't even duplicate on here because it's tier list maker. So it's going to look unique or whatever. But then, you know, your team picks like, okay, that's off lane Shinbi, and then your jungler's like Kalari, and your mid laner is Faye. And then the other team picks, you know, Drongo and Richter. And then it's like, if you're looking at your team comp, it's like so far your team is basically just not drafting a tank, right? Like, and this is essentially what this whole discussion pivots off of. Like, you want to have some kind of front line, or like at least like a bruiser front line to play into team fights. And so often I see people drafting teams that have like no way to team fight, right? Like they're just kind of drafting their favorite pick, or they're drafting whatever they want to play, and then you end up looking at the two comps side by side and you're like, okay, well, this is kind of messed up. So we have off lane, jungle, and mid. Let's grab us a carry and then like a support, right? What carry do we want? We'll take Murdoch. So like if our team ends like this, they have one last pick. What do they need? They have, let's say this is jungle, support, mid. They need an off laner. They take Crunch. Like if you look at these two team comps, like one of them is just a clear winner, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to win the game, but one of these two team comps is a clear winner. You have a bruiser for the front line, you have Richter for like peel and also being tanky from the support role, you have Steel as frontline tank. And then if you look at the other side, you have like Shinbi, who is like, she can play a lot of these different roles, but she's not super frontline. She's very assassin-like in nature. You have Kalari, who's same thing, an assassin, and then you have like a squishy support, and then like, you know, your two damage carries, which is like, you know, your 80 carry and then your like mage carry, or like your mage on the team. So this team comp just like can't really fight. Now, if they get really ahead and they're just like picking people off, you can absolutely win with this team comp, but it's never a team comp that I think that you should try to take into a game. So I guess what I'm trying to do on today's video is like build the awareness that like when you're drafting, try really hard to fit some kind of front line into the team. Now here's the beauty of this: if you're playing mid or carry, you don't have to care about this at all. This is actually just an entire video for offlane jungle and support players, because if you're supporting, you can support Steel, Richter, Rampage if you really want to, who's like, support Rampage is still good, but it's like mostly fallen down because he's just that good of a jungler. You can pick Narbash. That brings a little bit of bulk to the table, don't get me wrong, he's not a tank, but it does bring some bulk to the table. If you're an offlaner, consider picking, you know, some form of frontline, right? You can have Chimera, you can run, or not Chimera, you can run Grux. Sorry, I was looking at Chimera. You can run Grux, Crunch, you can offlane Richter. I'm not a huge fan of it. You can offlane Steel. Again, not a huge fan of that as much in the meta now. Sevarog. There's so many tank options. If you're jungle and you see that your team is kind of drafting squishy, you can run Grux, you can run Chimera, you can run Rampage, you can run Sevarog. I'm not a huge fan of Sevarog jungle. You can jungle Richter, Steel, Crunch. You get the point. There's a lot of these frontline heroes that often are just getting completely ignored in draft, and it's just because people want to play what they want to play, and I totally get it, but you should want to win as well. And I think that that's kind of like the moral of the story today. Make sure that you're drafting a team that can actually win. So I just reset my tier list maker all the way back to normal, which, oops, but we'll show this off one more time. You know, let's say hypothetically the team picks Sevarog, and then your team picks, and now this is almost like I'm competitively drafting, even though I'm not really, because I can't do mirrors. But you know, as long as you're picking tanks, right, you get the kind of point that it's fine to have like a team comp as long as there's a tank. So like having like a single Sevarog team, like that's cool because you can make that work. Maybe we'll do this as like support Steel, and then like our mid laner would be like Howie, and then y'all take like jungle Shinbi, and then support Muriel. And then what would this team comp need? We have jungle support, we would need an offlaner, they take offlane crunch. Like these two team comps are like much more even in terms of potential to win because they both have some form of frontline and supportiness. If we were to like just looking at these two team comps, I look at them and I think, well, which team comp do I think is better? Well, from my own perspective, I think that the bottom team comp's a little bit better, but that's irrelevant. My point is that I believe that these two team comps can fight each other. I actually do believe that these two team comps are going to have some kind of a decent game together. If we were to drop the Sevarog off, and let's say we turn our offlaner into a Kalari, because people do that sometimes, or even like a Gadget, this team is going to struggle much more against this team than if they had, say, the tank, the Sevarog, something to give them a bit more of a front line. And even something like this, where like maybe you do run like a double mage and you have Gadget in the offlane, but you run Richter support. This is even still like, Richter's not the best frontline tank in the game, but at least he brings some tankiness to the team, and you're playing a little bit more off poke with your mages, and then maybe pick potential with Richter. But even still, this is better than not running an actual tank, right? Like if you just did this team comp is going to have such a hard team fight. So that's just kind of what I was aiming for today. I would love to hear your thoughts. You know, going into drafts, there has been times where I see my team comp and I'm just sitting there thinking like, man, I might dodge this game because like I just don't think that we can win. And so moral of the story is just try to pick things that are you know, applicable to team fighting. You know, I know that there's always like a new hero that you can test out, or there's like fun ways that you can play things in the offlane. That's really important. I think things like Countess, I think Shinbi offlane, Mage offlanes, they're all very viable picks, but you still need that tank somewhere. So if you see that your jungler's picking a Rampage, hey, maybe make that your game to play something squishy in the offlane and experiment with that. But if not, maybe bring a Grux, you know, maybe bring a Sevarog, something that can bring a little bit more to the front line in a team fight. So friends, thank you so much for indulging in my discussion today. This is a pretty simple kind of topic. It's a little bit rudimentary, but I think that it's a useful one. So just be conscious of your team comp because it does make a difference in the end. So drop a like in the video, subscribe for future Predecessor content. As always, be sure to comment one another, tell someone you love them, and I'll see you on the next video.